What it do, Chillington crew? Aquarian OG back with another video for you.
This place got a new face, killing Joe's face. Got a Joe thing, chilling in a new fade. Loose space in a new place, what did he say? Eat a tic-tac, feeling like a true play. Step back and I never say no. I was winning over there, now I'm spending out of flow. Got a feeling in the air, but I'm feeling kinda low. Got a ceiling over here and I think it's gonna blow. Hey, this place got a new face, killing Joe's face.
Yo. Cruising through the internet. Looking for something to watch. Which is why I do these videos. Because I'm going to be watching them anyway. I might as well be doing something with what I'm watching instead of making it waste time. I might as well make my time worth something because I'm going to be doing it anyway, like I just said. Anyway, that's why I like doing these reaction videos, because I like watching these videos. So, I'm just saying, why not? Anyway, we got the 15 most expensive mistakes in all history. Now, the date that this was made, I don't know if they have any updates for new mistakes, if there's been any made. I imagine there's been some expensive mistakes made that would knock some of the stuff on this list off the list. But we're just going to work with this list. I got a couple of ideas that I think might be making this list. One might include NASA. You know what? I wonder how much COVID has cost. I would have to say that would be one. But it probably ain't going to be on this list, but I would say it would probably be one on the updated list. All right. Let's see what's up. We going in.
Uh-oh. While our rich and vibrant human history is filled to the
that was
brim
Harry
with
and
some of
Henderson's.
the most complex and enigmatic moments in modern
Oh.
history, we've also seen our fair share of downright blunders, whether it's the CEO of an up-and-coming corporation dropping the ball live on television or a slapstick approach to urban planning. Simple mistakes have often led
remember
to
the
some
boat.
devastatingly bleak consequences.
what the hell?
From throwing Bitcoin in the trash to defacing a priceless ancient artifact, here are the 15 most
I
expensive
think I remember
mistakes
that
in
too.
history. Dubai's sinking island, as the old saying.
Sinking island, which brought me to another sinking thought. Don't let me sink by not hitting that subscription button. Help a brother. No, just playing. It ain't like begging or nothing. But I'm saying, I'm striving for surviving. All right, let's go. Hit that sub button if you're not already a sub, yo.
Saying goes, it's a foolish man who builds his house on sand, or,
Right.
well, something like that anyway. For our first entry into this bonanza of blunders, we should probably tiptoe toward one of the most disastrous construction projects in recent memory, one which has highlighted the fact that even if you are some filthy rich billionaire, money can't claim what Mother Nature won't give willingly. Dubai, the jeweled city of the United Arab Emirates, is often known for its excess in wealth and lavish luxury, and has since become a mainstay for millionaires looking to outshine their nearest rivals. Well, back in the mid-2000s, the best way to do that was to buy your own slice of the world. Not literally, of course, but instead on a custom-built floating island forged out of thin air off the coast of Dubai's
Floating
picturesque
island.
coastline. Creatively dubbed the World, the project itself is a massive man-made archipelago assembled in the shape of all the countries on Earth and was intended to become one of the most exclusive neighborhoods on the planet. Well, unfortunately, the whole thing seems to have sank, both metaphorically and literally. Although over 70% of the project's 300 islands had been sold, just 2 of them have never been fully developed, representing the areas of Lebanon and Iceland, with the rest of the planet remaining empty as they sink back into the ocean. Although a company from the Netherlands recently purchased the bulk of the islands with the claim that they had a solution to the ever-growing problems faced by the project, they remain completely empty. Yikes.
Because there ain't no solution. Mother Nature said, no,
Bitcoin-
we're taking this.
$89 metal roof installation? Click the link below this video to see if you qualify for this economic
In the trash. Ever wish that you solution to the ever-growing problems faced by the project? They remain completely empty. Yikes.
Mother Nature said, we're taking this.
Bitcoin in the trash. Ever wish that you would have taken your weird friend's advice and purchased a boatload of Bitcoin back in the early 2000s? Well, given the fact that one whole Bitcoin was worth roughly $20,000 at its highest value, the cryptocurrency has garnered a reputation as one of the most controversial commodities of the 21st century. And tales of misfortune and woe of would-be investors have since become a dime a dozen. Believe it or not, but there have been numerous tall tales about early-day Bitcoin enthusiasts giving away their fortune without knowing it. But if you thought that was a bad idea, then nothing compares to the treasure trove of Bitcoin that this guy accidentally threw in the trash. Back in 2013, an IT consultant from Wales, James Howes, somehow managed to throw away a hard drive filled with over 7,500 units of Bitcoin, which he'd reportedly mined in the early days of the cryptocurrency emerging. Well, given the fact that the hard drive contains around $100 million worth of Bitcoin, you'd think that this would be a pretty pressing challenge for him to track down his throwaway fortune. But despite trying, Mr. Howes has been allegedly thwarted by his local council. As you may imagine, when he threw the device away, it ended up in the city's nearby dump. And despite trying to convince local authorities to dig up the site, Mr. Howes has been refused on numerous occasions. He's even offered to give the local council a 10% cut off the Bitcoin fortune, which equates to around 7.4 million British pounds. Oops. Hey, we don't mind digging.
10%.
The Piper Alpha disaster. Working on an offshore oil rig is a dangerous enough occupation, but throughout the turbulent history of the industry, the world's deadliest offshore oil disaster occurred back in 1988, when an otherwise normal day for the Piper Alpha crew turned into an unimaginable nightmare. Located 120 miles out in the North Sea, the Piper Alpha oil platform was staffed by 226 crew members, and the remote site had been in operation for over a decade after production began back in 1976. Tragically, on the 6th of July, roughly around 10 p.m., an enormous explosion was heard on the deck of the platform, immediately followed by an all-consuming fire which spread between the platform's modules. As the platform was responsible for mining potent pockets of oil and gas, the resulting fires burned so intensely that any odds of survival were incredibly slim. All in all, 167 men lost their lives, including 2 rescue operators who had been the first responders to the disaster that bravely attempted to battle the inferno. Incredibly, despite the massive loss of life, 61 people managed to survive the blaze after managing to reach the platform's lifeboats after being alerted by the initial explosion. In November of the same year, a public inquiry was set up to determine the cause of the Piper Alpha disaster, but as none of the senior members of the company's management team survived the tragic event, concluding evidence was increasingly difficult to come by. All in all, it was concluded that the initial explosion was likely caused by a leak of hydrocarbons, and it remains to be the most devastating disaster in the industry's history. The walkie-talkie architecture is pretty cool, right? Well, no matter what you think about the importance of engineering prestige, the simple fact that some buildings are built to impact our lives in a number of creative ways often goes overlooked. However, while many buildings and skyscrapers across the planet have earned a reputation for their awe-inspiring design, sometimes they can really miss the mark. Built back in 2013, a London skyscraper named the Walkie-Talkie became responsible for melting nearby objects and vehicles and could have potentially spelled a disastrous outcome for nearby car owners. Believe it or not, but shortly after first being built,
because of the heat
vehicles
from
that
the
were
reflection
parked in the close vicinity of the walkie-talkie reportedly began to melt over short periods of time.
Crazy.
In one case, the owner of a Jaguar found parts of his car, the wing mirror and the front badge, completely melted after parking in a nearby street for just 2 hours. Incredibly, the damage was quickly traced back to the 37-story skyscraper at 20 Fenchurch Street, where it was determined that the highly reflective window panels had reflected so much heat that it was capable of melting carbon fiber car components. What the heck? While the blunder was quickly dealt with, the fact that the oversight could have easily resulted in a potentially fatal explosion is insane. Thankfully, the company resolved all the damage caused and swiftly apologized. Close call.
They had some money.
The American War in Vietnam and Francis Ford Coppola's seminal cinematic masterpiece Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando's character describes the Vietnam War as the horror. While that film cuts particularly close to the bone, the truth behind its fictional judgment is far closer to home. From 1961 up until the surrender
yeah,
of the
I really
Saigon
did.
government, the United States of America spent more than $141 billion in southern Vietnam. Peace accords were signed in 1973. More than 56,000 American servicemen and women had died in the Vietnam War. All in all, it's often viewed as the costliest war in modern history, lauded as the moment that modern combat changed forever, where the human and economic expense of the overseas military conflict was finally brought into question. In many ways, measuring the full cost of the Vietnam War goes far beyond just numbers and statistics. In total, between 1965 and 1974, it's believed that 1,353,000 people lost their lives due to the highly criticized conflict, encompassing U.S. military deaths, Viet Cong fighters, and innocent civilians of both North and South Vietnam caught in the crossfire. It is seen by many critics as an entirely preventable conflict, and protesters of the Vietnam War were vocal throughout both the United States and the rest of the world. It remains to be the longest war ever enacted by the United States and one of the most expensive events in history. The French railway debacle.
The French
The
railway?
term red tape seems to be handed around far too often in this day and age. For decades, the critics of bureaucracy
I
have
didn't know
become
that.
pretty brass-necked when facing down the most mundane of issues. But when it comes to this French railway debacle, bureaucracy is exactly what everyone needed. While many municipal blunders often sneak under the radar, back in 2014, the French train operator SNCF discovered one of the costliest mistakes in their company's history. After winning the contract to revamp the country's railway system, SNCF began building over 2,000 brand new train carriages at the massive cost of 15 billion euros, a little over $20.5 billion. However, there was one slight mistake. Nearly all of the train carriages were too wide for the transport system's regional platforms, meaning that despite being brand
they
new,
couldn't get through
state-of-the-art machines, they couldn't even fit inside the train stations. Astonishingly, despite meticulous planning, it seemed that France's national rail
missed
operator
one
had given the
detail.
company the wrong dimensions to the platforms. and
You
no one seemed
had
to have
one
picked up on the
job.
error. Although the platforms were finally altered at a huge expense, the debacle remains to be one of the most memorable blunders in France's locomotive history. King Tut's beard.
Oh,
Surely
yeah,
there
I
has to
remember
be
hearing
some
about
kind of
this.
curse connected to this. And if you're ever in the business of poking around in a museum after hours, make sure that you're never stupid enough to meddle with any ancient Egyptian death masks. Back in 2016,
mask.
8 employees at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo somehow managed to de-beard the legendary face mask of Tutankhamun, a 3,000-year-old artifact that has captured the hearts and minds of adventurers and archaeologists alike. Incredibly, although the circumstances surrounding the incident remain unclear, somehow one accidental blunder resulted in the pristine gold and blue braided beard becoming detached, glued back on. Yeah, you heard that right, glued. Following a series of investigations, it appeared that the team of 8 employees had returned to the scene of the crime on multiple occasions with the intention of correcting their botched work with metal tools and, well, more glue. Believe it or not, but the 8 Egyptian museum employees were put on trial for the incident, where all of them faced charges of negligence and violating professional standards. It remains to be one of the biggest blunders in archaeological history.
They glued the hell out of that damn thing, too.
Mizuo's
They was
Fat
like,
Finger
nope.
Blunder. For those of you familiar with video games and esports, the term fat finger is often lauded as the biggest choke a professional gamer can make. Well,
Yeah,
interestingly
what happened?
enough, it seems that the Tokyo Stock Exchange also saw its fair share of digit-based blundering, after one of the most avoidable mistakes in economic history resulted in a $225 million loss on the stock exchange. Yeah, you heard that correct. Back in 2005, the Japanese government went into crisis mode after one of the country's biggest brokerage firms lost 27 billion yen on an accidental stock trade. The trouble began on one fateful morning when a trader at Mizuo Securities attempted to sell 610,000 shares of a value of 1 yen, roughly less than a penny apiece. In actuality, their intention was the complete reverse, and the trader had intended to sell a single share for 610,000 yen himself. Oops! Despite quickly realizing their mistake, Mizuo allegedly tried to cancel the order 3 times, but the stock exchange refused,
Had already
stating that their
picked it up.
system doesn't cancel transactions even if they are accidentally ordered. Even bigger oops. The mistake has been immortalized as one of the biggest blunders in financial history, and although the subsequent problems were later smoothed out, it proved that it pays to double-check your work.
Yeah.
Guitar smashing gone wrong. Ever since his first entry, Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino has been heralded as one of the hottest minds in Hollywood history and has since earned himself a reputation for his cutthroat cinematic endeavors into the more visceral aspects of the human condition.
This was
In
Hateful
his
Eight.
second most recent film, 2015's The Hateful Eight, Tarantino decided to explore the brutal and violent world of the gunslinging Wild West. And what better way to do that than by kitting out his log cabin set with some real-life 19th century
his log
antiques.
cabin?
Well, one of those antiques
Oh,
just so
one of those
happened
was
to
real?
be a genuine 150-year-old Martin, perhaps one of the rarest and most coveted acoustic guitars in existence. Handcrafted back in 1860, the guitar was believed to have been
Damn.
worth around $40,000 and was lent to the film prop department under the
I
strict
thought it was gonna be
condition
more than
that
that.
it was to be handled with extreme care. However, in one scene, Kurt Russell's character picked up the guitar and smashed it into pieces, with the understanding that the original antique would have been swapped out for the dummy prop.
Oh.
Well, as you can imagine,
Nope,
that
missed that
didn't
mark.
happen. And the scene that finally made it to the director's cut captured Russell as he smashed a priceless antique to smithereens.
It was real.
Yikes. The Millennium Bridge's wobble. Sure, we've already
What?
seen some pretty bad engineering blunders, but when it
No.
comes to the iconic wobble of the Millennium Bridge, few municipal monstrosities
Iconic
live up
wobble?
to its wobbly
No.
reputation. Back
Not
in the
no
year
wobbly
2000,
ass bridge.
the opening
Nope,
of London's
sorry.
Millennium Bridge had been
don't do
heralded as
heights.
one of the biggest events in the city's rich history, with crowds of thousands gathering to be the first people to
Going on
walk
a
across
wobble
the
on this
state-of-the-art
bridge.
footbridge
Hell no.
suspended above the River Thames. However, as incredible crowds of pedestrians converged, the bridge gave
broke.
rise to significant shaking and swaying, bringing into question whether the structure itself was safe to travel across. After just 2 days of being opened, city officials shut the brand new structure down, with Londoners nicknaming
That's a
it
wrap.
the Wobbly Bridge. In order to officially correct
Cut
the
the
problem,
music.
which was determined to be due to a weird synchronicity between the bridge's
even
sideways sway and
understand that.
pedestrian footsteps, the Millennium Bridge was closed for a further 2 years until the correct repairs were made. Sure, the bridge became iconic, but for a whole different reason. Blockbuster misses the boat. Oh, Blockbuster.
Blockbuster.
The tragic tale of a once
Oh, I
great
miss you,
titan of home
Blockbuster.
cinema sinking like a stone in the brave new world of the 21st century. For many, it's the smell, the stained carpets, and the sheen of plastic wrap. For others,
Stained
it's the
carpets,
snacks,
hell yeah.
the unrivaled selection on display for a Friday night rental bonanza or a sleepover in your parents' basement. Ask any kid
All
from
of
the
that.
80s or 90s and they'll tell you that Blockbuster is nostalgia incarnate, and at its height,
All
it
of
was
that.
one of the most profitable companies of its era. So where did it all go wrong? Well, simply put, they screwed up, big time. You see, as the world quickly changed throughout the early 2000s and onward, Blockbuster failed to keep up with an entirely different kind of market, one that was pioneered by a small company known as Netflix. As it seemed, Blockbuster had no chill for the
Yep.
fledgling company, and when their CEO was presented with the offer to buy Netflix for just $50
Oh,
million,
Blockbuster coulda
he
bought
laughed the whole
Netflix.
thing off as a joke, considering the fact that Netflix is worth around $194 billion by today's estimations. Blockbuster could have held on to the
He
crown
who
as the
gets the
king of
last
sofa-side
laugh.
cinema. But you know what they say, pride comes before the fall. Seongsu Bridge. If you thought the Millennium Bridge was a blunder of disastrous proportions, then the deadly
This
collapse
bad
of the
boy.
Seongsu Bridge in South Korea will be surely to shock you. Constructed over the Han River in Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, the bridge was constructed in order to link the Seongdong and Gangneam districts together. After 2 years
Say
of
that again?
extensive construction, the state-of-the-art bridge was finally completed in 1979, but over a decade
I gotta hear homie say that again.
years of extensive construction, the state-of-the-art bridge was finally completed in 19.
Hold on, we gotta
The
hear
Millennium
that
Bridge
again.
was a blunder of disastrous proportions, then the deadly collapse of the
Say
Seongsu
what?
Bridge in South Korea will be surely to shock you. Constructed over the Han River in Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, the bridge was constructed in order to link the Seongdong and Gangneam districts together. After 2 years of extensive
I just
construction,
had to hear it
the
again.
state-of-the-art bridge was finally completed in 1979.
Seongdong and
But over a
Gangwon.
decade later, it will become
that's what he
infamous
said. I'm
for
not
a
even
deadly
sure.
collapse that took the lives of 32 people while injuring dozens more. Early in the morning, an urban bus filled with passengers, as well as 6 cars, plummeted into the water after a large selection of the Seongsu Bridge collapsed into the Han River. Despite standing firm for over a decade, it was later found that the structural failure had ultimately been caused by improper welding. It would become one of the costliest engineering mistakes in South Korea's history, and it served as a reminder that those who cut corners can often pay the ultimate price.
Why would you do that on a bridge?
B-2 crashes and burns over $1 billion.
I think I remember
the U.S.
this.
Air Force, believe it or not, but one of the costliest mistakes in their long-serving history came at an insane economic price. Back in 2011,
I want to say
the
I
Air
remember
Force
this.
lost one of their state-of-the-art B-2 stealth bombers in one of the most insane disasters in aeronautical history. After an intense investigation, it was found that the bomber had come into difficulty after extensive rain had battered the cockpit, and moisture had then entered into the vehicle's data sensors, giving the wrong inputs to the flight control computers. Thankfully, the 2 crew members on board successfully ejected from the aircraft at a low altitude, and no one was hurt.
A low
during
altitude,
the event.
damn near the
But
ground.
when the B-2 bomber hit the ground, the subsequent explosion became an unrivaled disaster. As the fuel burned, the incident resulted in a total loss of around $1.4 billion for the U.S. Air Force, becoming the most expensive crash in their entire history.
I believe it.
Costa Concordia. On the topic of transportational
Concordia.
blunders,
Sound like a
few of
good-ass
them can
place to
stand
get some
up
rum
the
punch.
outright stupidity of the Costa Concordia cruise liner. Back in 2012, 4,229 people were traveling on board the Concordia, one of the
4,000.
largest cruise liners in the Italian company's
It's
fleet.
beached.
As they sailed through the night, at the behest of the captain, the liner was taken off route as it steered close to the island of Giglio, where it then became partially capsized on a patch of perilous rocks. Although you may think that these things rarely happen, the incident tragically took the lives of 32 people, and the ship's captain was rightfully pinned as the man responsible for the disaster. Not only that, but it was
Really?
later
32
found that the
people?
captain had abandoned the ship before all the passengers were even evacuated. Yikes.
Hell no! He dipped.
Mars Climate Orbiter. And for our final entry into expensive mistakes in history, we have to turn our attention toward the tragic tale of the Mars Climate Orbiter, a robotic space probe that was launched by NASA on December 11th,
By
1998.
NASA. I
The
told
mission
you there was going to be a
celebrated as
NASA
an
mistake in
exciting
there.
endeavor into the red
Wasn't the
planet's
one I thought it was
atmosphere,
gonna be.
and scientists have gone to painstaking lengths to ensure that the whole thing was a success. Well, after almost 10 months of travel to Mars, as the orbiter hurtled through the atmosphere, it tragically burned into a blazing fireball and broke into pieces. The Mars Climate Orbiter was a complete and utter failure, and as it turned out, it was down to an incorrect math equation. Incredibly, 2 entirely different values had been used to calibrate the object's flight path, with one team in Europe using metric units and the other in the US using inches and
Using
feet.
standard.
Oh, wow, now that's a goof. Well, there we have it.
Man, that's a bad beat. Because you use centimeters and I use inches. That's a bad beat. Hey, what y'all think about this? If you didn't hit the subscribe button already, give me a little click of that little button right there. And hit me a little yes on the like on the video. That was pretty interesting. It wasn't too bad. It was some in there that I would be like, yeah, but there was some I hadn't heard of in there. But it was definitely a pretty decent list. All right, y'all. Chillington out. Deuces on the flips. I'll see y'all on the next video.